The bright lights of the command deck reflected off Lieutenant Alan Carter's polished boots as he stared at the message on his screen. His heart beat faster. After 5 years of distant communications with the Valdurian Empire, Earth was sending its first diplomatic team to their homeworld. And somehow his name was on the list. "Did you see this?" asked Katie, his fellow officer, leaning over his shoulder. "You're going to actual alien space." Alan nodded, still processing the information. 6 months ago, he had submitted his application for the diplomatic corps, never expecting to be selected. His background was in military communications with a side specialization in xenolinguistics. Nothing special compared to the hundreds of brilliant minds at Space Command. "The briefing starts in 30 minutes, he said, standing up. "I should get ready." The briefing room buzzed with activity when Alan arrived. 20 humans had been selected for this mission. Scientists, diplomats, cultural experts, and a small security detail. Admiral Patel stood at the front, her expression serious. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is not just humanity's first visit to the Valdurian homeworld. This is our chance to secure our place in the galactic community," she said. "The Valdurians are one of the oldest spacefaring races. Their technology is centuries beyond ours. Their alliance could help us advance in ways we can barely imagine." Screens around the room lit up with images of the Valdurians. They were tall, roughly 7 feet on average, with skin that seemed to shimmer with a faint internal light. Their bodies were covered in a hard, shell-like layer that resembled an exoskeleton, though the briefing explained it was actually a calcium-rich outer skin. "The Valdurian Empire spans 27 star systems," continued the cultural attaché, Susan Reeves. "Their society is hierarchical, with a hereditary emperor at the top. Status is everything to them." She paused, looking at each of them, "and they are extremely appearance-conscious. Physical perfection is highly valued in their culture." Alan took careful notes. Every detail could be important when representing humanity. 2 weeks later, the Earth Alliance vessel Horizon departed from the lunar dock. The ship was humanity's newest and most impressive vessel, though Alan suspected it would look primitive to the Valdurians. He spent most of the 3-month journey studying Valdurian language, customs, history, biology, anything that might help him understand their potential allies. The ship had a training room where the team practiced Valdurian greetings and protocols daily. "Remember," instructed Dr. Greg Winters, their cultural expert, "never show the palms of your hands to a Valdurian of higher rank. It's considered a challenge." The day they entered Valdurian space, everyone gathered on the observation deck. Through the massive windows, they watched as sleek alien ships approached. The vessels moved with impossible grace, their hulls gleaming like mother-of-pearl in the light of an unfamiliar sun. "Escort vessels," said Captain Lori Chen. "They'll guide us to Valduria Prime." Alan felt a mixture of excitement and fear as the alien ships surrounded them. Humanity had encountered 4 other alien species before the Valdurians, but none so advanced or powerful. The first glimpse of the Valdurian homeworld took his breath away. Unlike Earth's blue-green sphere, Valduria Prime glowed with swirls of purple and gold. Massive orbital structures surrounded it like a web of diamonds. As they descended toward the capital city, Alan watched the landscape below. Towering spires of crystal and metal reached into the clouds. The architecture was flowing and organic, unlike anything on Earth. "We're making history," whispered Nicole, one of the scientists standing next to him. "The first humans to set foot on Valduria Prime." Alan nodded, his throat tight with emotion. Whatever happened next would shape the future of human-Valdurian relations for generations. He straightened his uniform and prepared to represent Earth on an alien world. The grand hall of the Valdurian Imperial Palace stretched farther than Alan could see. The ceiling arched high above, embedded with glowing crystals that formed moving constellations. The human delegation walked in a tight group, following their Valdurian guide. "The Emperor will receive you now," said the guide, a tall Valdurian named Krex. His skin shimmered with blue light as he spoke. "Remember to bow and keep your eyes lowered until addressed." Alan's dress uniform felt stiff and inadequate compared to the flowing metallic garments the Voldurians wore. The humans had practiced this ceremony for months, but nothing prepared them for the reality of standing before alien royalty. The Emperor sat on a raised platform. He was taller than the other Voldurians, with skin that glowed golden. His exoskeleton plates were decorated with intricate patterns. "Humans of Earth," the Emperor's voice boomed through the hall. "We welcome you to Valduria Prime as friends and potential allies." The formal introductions began. Each human stepped forward, bowed, and stated their name and position. When Alan's turn came, he performed the ritual perfectly, but as he stepped back, something caught his eye. To the right of the Emperor sat 3 Voldurians who shared his golden glow. The royal children, Alan realized. 2 stood tall and proud, but the third sat in what appeared to be a hovering chair. She was smaller than the others, and one side of her body seemed slightly different in shape. As the ceremony continued, Alan found his attention drawn back to her. Unlike the other royals who barely looked at the humans, she watched them with obvious interest. Her eyes, large and multifaceted like all Valdurians, seemed to take in every detail. After the formal greetings, the delegation was invited to a feast. Humans and Valdurians sat at long crystal tables. Alan found himself seated near the royal family, though not at the high table. "You are Lieutenant Carter, the communications specialist," a voice asked. Alan looked up to see a Valdurian noble standing near him. "Yes, that's me," Alan replied, quickly remembering to lower his palms beneath the table. "I am Trazyn, Chief Science Minister. I understand you have studied our language extensively." Their conversation flowed easily as they discussed the differences between human and Valdurian communication patterns. As they talked, Alan noticed the princess in the hover chair approach. The Valdurians around her subtly moved away, creating an empty space. Trazyn's demeanor changed. He cut the conversation short. "Excuse me, Lieutenant. I am needed elsewhere." The princess glided toward Alan. Up close, he could see that her right side was smaller than her left, and her exoskeleton plates didn't form the same smooth pattern as other Valdurians. "Greetings, Lieutenant Carter," she said. Her voice was melodic, but softer than other Valdurians. "I am Princess Zilara." Alan bowed deeply. "It's an honor, Your Highness." "You need not be so formal. I watched you during the ceremony. You were the only one who looked at me directly." Alan felt his face flush. "I apologize if that was inappropriate." Zilara made a gesture he didn't recognize. It was refreshing. "Most people pretend I don't exist." Before Alan could respond, another royal approached, one of Zilara's siblings. The princess's light dimmed slightly. "Sister, father requests your presence," the other royal said, not acknowledging Alan. Princess Zilara nodded. "It was interesting to meet you, Lieutenant Carter. Perhaps we will speak again." As she glided away, Alan noticed how other Voldurians stepped aside, their lights dimming as she passed. It wasn't respect, he realized with surprise. It was avoidance. Later that evening, as the humans discussed their impressions, Alan asked Dr. Winters about the princess. "Ah, you noticed," Winters said quietly. "Princess Zilara is considered imperfect by Valdurian standards. Her condition would be similar to a mild form of cerebral palsy in humans. And that matters so much." Winters nodded gravely. "To Valdurians, physical perfection is everything. Despite her royal blood, she's seen as lesser." Alan thought about the intelligence he'd seen in Zilara's eyes. "That seems like their loss," he said. 3 days after the welcome ceremony, Alan received his assignment. He would serve as the human liaison to the Valdurian Scientific Academy. The news pleased him. Science was a universal language, something that might bridge the gap between their species more easily than politics. Alan arrived at the academy, a sprawling building made of the same crystal-like material as the palace, Inside, the walls glowed with soft light, and Valdurian scientists moved between laboratories with purpose. "Lieutenant Carter," a voice called. It was Trazyn, the science minister he had met at the feast. "Welcome to our humble institution. We have prepared a workspace for you." Trazyn led Alan through corridors filled with equipment he couldn't begin to understand. They stopped at a laboratory door that slid open automatically. "This is our xenobiology department," Trazyn explained. "You will work with our team to help us understand humans better and to learn about our biology in return." Alan stepped inside and froze. Princess Solara was there, her hover chair positioned at a workstation. She looked up and her skin brightened slightly. "Lieutenant Carter," she said. "What a pleasant surprise." Trazyn's light dimmed. "Princess Solara oversees our xenobiology research. She has shown unusual interest in other species." The way he said it made it sound like a character flaw. Alan noticed how Trazyn kept extra distance between himself and the princess. "I look forward to working with Her Highness," Alan said firmly. Trazyn excused himself quickly, leaving Alan alone with Zilara and two other Valdurian scientists who worked at stations far from the princess. "They put you with me because they think it's a lesser assignment," Zilara said directly once Trazyn was gone. "The humans who get to work with the weapons researchers or the engineers are the ones they truly want to impress." Alan was surprised by her honesty. "Then they've made a mistake. Understanding each other seems pretty important to me." Over the next few weeks, Alan and Zilara worked closely together. She was brilliant, grasping concepts about human biology faster than he could explain them. In return, she taught him about Valdurians. "Our bioluminescence is both communication and emotion," she explained one day, making her skin pulse with different colors. "This shade means curiosity. This one is amusement. This darker one is sadness." Alan learned that Zilara's condition wasn't genetic. She had suffered from a rare illness as a child. The treatments saved her life, but left her with permanent damage to her right side. "In our culture, it doesn't matter why I am imperfect, only that I am," she explained. "My father keeps me at court because I am his daughter, but everyone knows I am a political liability." "That seems terribly unfair," Alan said. "It is reality," Zilara replied. "Besides, it has its advantages. While my siblings attend endless political functions, I've been free to pursue science." Her laboratory became Alan's favorite place on Valduria Prime. They developed a comfortable rhythm, sharing knowledge and gradually, personal stories. He told her about Earth, about growing up in the countryside with wide open skies. She told him about growing up in the palace, always watched but never truly seen. One afternoon, a group of Valdurian nobles visited the academy. They treated Zilara with thinly veiled disdain, speaking over her and ignoring her contributions. "Princess Zilara's unique perspective is certainly interesting," one noble said with a tone that suggested otherwise. "But perhaps we should consult with the main research team for the official position." Alan saw Zilara's light dim, though her face remained composed. When the nobles left, he asked, "Does that happen often?" "All my life," she said quietly. "You're the first person who actually listens when I speak." "Then everyone else is missing out," Alan replied. "You're the smartest person I've met on this planet." Her skin glowed with a color he hadn't seen before, a soft rose gold light that spread across her face. He didn't need a translation to understand its meaning. 2 months into the diplomatic mission, an announcement shook the imperial palace. Alan first heard about it when he arrived at the laboratory to find Zilara's workspace empty. "The princess will not be coming today," said one of the other scientists, not looking up from his work. "Is everything all right?" Alan asked, concerned. "You have not heard. The Emperor made an announcement this morning. Princess Zilara is to be mated." Alan felt a strange jolt in his chest. "Mated? You mean married?" The scientist made a gesture that Alan had learned was the Valdurian equivalent of a shrug. It is a political arrangement. She will be joined with a representative from the Crexian system. Ellen tried to keep his voice even. I was under the impression that Voldurians with physical differences weren't typically chosen for mating. They are not. This is unusual. Some say it is a sign of changing attitudes. The scientist's tone suggested he didn't believe that explanation. Alan couldn't focus on his work. After several hours of distraction, he sent a message to Zilara asking if she was all right. To his surprise, she invited him to meet her in the palace gardens. The gardens were unlike anything on Earth. Plants that moved like animals, flowers that changed colors as he walked past, and trees that grew in impossible spiral patterns. Zilara waited near a fountain that flowed upward instead of down. "Alan," she said when she saw him. Her light was dim, almost gray. "Thank you for coming." "I heard the news," he said, sitting on a bench near her hover chair. "Congratulations." He wasn't sure if that was the right response. Zilara's light flickered in what he now recognized as bitter amusement. "Do not congratulate me. This honor is just another way to remove me from court." "What do you mean?" She moved her chair closer to him. "The Crexian system is at the edge of our empire. I am to be sent there as a diplomatic spouse, a way to honor the Crexians while getting rid of the embarrassing princess." Alan felt anger rising. "That's terrible. How can your father do that?" "Politics," Zilara said simply. "The Crexian ambassador has a cousin who needs elevation in status. My father needs Crexian support against the Moldari alliance. It is a convenient solution for everyone." She paused. "Except me. And this, mating. What exactly does it involve?" Alan asked carefully. "For Valdurians, mating is both biological and political. We form physical and legal bonds that last a lifetime." Her light dimmed further. "But in this case, it will be in name only. The Crexian has no interest in an imperfect mate. I will live in separate quarters, make occasional public appearances, and otherwise be forgotten." Helen reached out hesitantly and touched her hand, something he had never done before. Voldurians rarely engaged in physical contact. Her skin was warm and slightly textured. "I'm sorry," he said. "That's not right. I have always known my future would be decided for me," Zilara said. "But I had hoped." She trailed off, then continued in a stronger voice. "I had dreamed of a true partnership, someone who would see me, not my flaws." Just then, Alan's communication device buzzed. It was an urgent message from the human delegation. "There's a situation," he told Zilara. "The Moldari Alliance has sent warships to the border of Valdurian space. All humans are being called for an emergency briefing." Zilara's light pulsed with alarm. "The Moldari. They have been threatening war for years, but never so boldly." "I have to go," Alan said, standing reluctantly. "Of course," Zilara replied. "Duty comes first." "But Alan," her voice softened, "thank you for listening. Few ever have." As Alan hurried to the human embassy, his mind raced with thoughts of politics, warfare, and a princess who deserved so much better than being a political pawn. The emergency meeting lasted for hours. The human delegation listened as Captain Lisa Moore explained the situation. "The Moldari Alliance sees our alliance with the Valdurians as a threat," she said. "They've moved their warships into position as a show of force." "Are we in danger?" asked one of the scientists. "Not immediately," Captain Moore replied. "The Valdurian fleet is responding. But this raises the stakes of our mission. The Emperor needs our support now more than ever." When the meeting ended, Alan pulled Dr. Winters aside. "I need to understand something about Valdurian culture," he said. "What exactly does mating mean to them?" Dr. Winters raised an eyebrow. "This is about Princess Zilara's announcement." Alan nodded. "Valdurian mating is complex," Dr. Winters explained. "It's physical, like human marriage, but also involves a biochemical bond. Their bodies actually sync up, sharing certain biological processes. It's permanent and creates a deep connection." and for them to arrange a fake mating for political reasons. Dr. Winters frowned. It's unusual. Traditionally, mating is sacred to Valdurians. He gave Alan a careful look. May I ask why you're so interested? Alan hesitated. I've been working with Princess Zilara. She's brilliant, kind, and being treated unfairly. Be careful, Lieutenant, Dr. Winters warned. Personal involvement with Valdurian royalty could complicate our mission. Alan couldn't sleep that night. He kept thinking about Zilara, about how her own people treated her, about the unfair future being forced upon her. The next day, he went back to the laboratory. Zilara was there, working as if nothing had changed. How are you? Alan asked. I am proceeding with my duties, she replied formally. Her light was dim and steady, showing little emotion. They worked in silence for a while, but Alan couldn't focus. Finally, he said, I learned more about Valdurian mating customs yesterday. Zilara looked up. Did you? It seems wrong to force you into something so important just for politics. Her light flickered briefly. It happens often in royal families. My siblings will also have arranged matings. But theirs will be real, Alan said. Not just for show. Zilara turned fully toward him. Yes, they will have true mates, partners who share their lives completely. Her voice grew softer. Do you know what it's like to be surrounded by people, yet completely alone? Alan moved closer. I think I might. Even before my illness, I was different. I asked too many questions. I was interested in science instead of politics. Her light pulsed with old pain. After I became physically different, it was just another reason to avoid me. On Earth, we've learned that differences can be valuable, Alan said. Different perspectives, different abilities. They make us stronger as a whole. A nice sentiment, Zilara said, but not how most species evolve. Maybe it's how we grow beyond our evolution. That evening, Alan received an invitation to a formal event at the palace. All the human delegation would attend, along with Valdurian nobility and representatives from allied worlds. Alan wore his dress uniform and tried to blend in with the other humans, but his eyes kept searching for Zilara. He found her at the edge of the great hall, her hover chair positioned near a window. She was watching the proceedings with a detached expression. May I join you? Alan asked. Her light brightened slightly when she saw him. Please do. They watched as dancers performed in the center of the hall. The Valdurians moved with grace that seemed impossible given their rigid outer layers. They're beautiful, Alan said. Yes, perfect physical specimens, Zilara replied, selected for their flawless forms and movements. I wasn't talking about their appearance, Alan said. I meant the way they express emotions through movement. It reminds me of how your light changes with your feelings. Zilara turned to him, surprise evident in her glow. Most people only see what's on the surface. Most people miss what matters, Alan replied. For the first time since her mating announcement, Zilara's light shimmered with genuine warmth. The date for Princess Zilara's mating ceremony grew closer. Preparations filled the palace with activity. Delegates from the Crexian system arrived, including Zilara's intended mate, a tall Valdurian named Drax. Alan observed him from a distance during official functions. Drax never once approached Zilara or spoke to her in public. 1 week before the ceremony, Alan found Zilara in the laboratory much later than usual. The other scientists had left hours ago. You're working late, Alan said. Zilara didn't look up from her data screen. I am completing my research. Once I leave for the Crexian system, someone else will take over this project. Alan sat beside her. Is there anything I can do to help? She finally turned to him. Her light was so dim it was barely visible. No, Alan. There is nothing anyone can do. Have you met with Drax, your intended mate? Once. Briefly. He looked at me the way one might look at a damaged piece of equipment. Her voice remained steady, but her light flickered with pain. He made it clear our arrangement is political only. He has a lover already, Someone perfect by Valdurian standards. I will be sent to a separate residence once we reach Crexia. That's not right, Alan said, his hands clenching into fists. You deserve better. What I deserve and what will happen are very different things, Zilura replied. Alan had been studying Valdurian culture intensely since the mating announcement. He had learned everything he could about their customs, their biology, their traditions. Is there any way to stop this? He asked. Can you refuse? And shame my father before all our allies? Create a diplomatic incident? Zilara shook her head. No, my duty is clear. What about your happiness? Does that count for nothing? Zilara's light pulsed once, brightly. Happiness is not a consideration for royalty, especially not for one like me. Alan stood up suddenly. That's not acceptable. It is reality, Zilara said. Reality can change, Alan replied. He paced around the laboratory, thinking hard. What if you had another option? There is no other option. The arrangements are made. The ceremony is in 7 days. Ellen stopped pacing and looked directly at her. What if someone else offered to mate with you? Someone who actually cares about you. Zilara's light flashed with surprise. What are you saying, Ellen? He knelt beside her hover chair, his heart pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. I've been thinking about this for weeks. About you. About us. There is no us, Zilara said softly. There cannot be. Why not? Because we're different species. Because of your physical condition. Those things don't matter to me. Alan, you don't understand what you're suggesting. Valdurian mating isn't like human marriage. It's permanent. Biological. Our systems would try to sync, with unknown consequences. I've researched it, Alan said. I've spoken with medical experts. They believe it's biologically possible, even if unprecedented. Zilara's light began to pulse rapidly. Even if it were possible, my father would never allow it. The Crexian Alliance. Earth is a more valuable ally than the Crexian system. Alan interrupted, especially with the Muldari threat growing. This is madness, Zilara whispered, but her light had brightened considerably. Alan took a deep breath. He reached for her hand, feeling the strange texture of her skin against his. Princess Zilara of the Valdurian Empire, he said formally, will you mate with me? The words hung in the air between them. Zilara's light flashed brighter than he had ever seen it, cycling through colors so quickly he couldn't identify them all. Alan, do you understand what you're asking? What it would mean? I understand that I care about you, that I see you, the real you, your brilliant mind, your kind spirit, your strength. He squeezed her hand. I understand that I'd rather face the unknown with you than watch you be sent away to be forgotten. Before Zilara could answer, the laboratory door slid open. A palace guard stood there, his light pulsing with official urgency. Princess Zilara, Lieutenant Carter, the guard said. Your presence is required by the Emperor, immediately. Alan and Zilara followed the guard through the palace corridors in silence. Neither spoke about what had just happened in the laboratory. The proposal hummed between them, unanswered. The throne room was crowded when they arrived. The Emperor sat on his raised platform, his light burning bright gold with barely controlled anger. The human delegation stood to one side, looking uncomfortable. On the other side stood Drax and the Crexian representatives. Lieutenant Carter, the Emperor's voice boomed across the chamber. Explain yourself. Ellen stepped forward, confused. Your Imperial Majesty, I'm not sure what you mean. Do not play ignorant, the Emperor said. The palace has surveillance systems. Your conversation with my daughter was recorded and brought to my attention. Ellen felt his stomach drop. He glanced at Zilara, whose light had dimmed to almost nothing. Captain Moore stepped forward from the human delegation. Lieutenant Carter, what have you done? I asked Princess Zilara to mate with me. Alan said clearly, deciding honesty was his only option. Instead of being sent to Crexia with someone who will ignore her, Gasps echoed through the chamber. The Crexian delegates buzzed with angry light patterns. "This is an outrage," Drax said. "An insult to our system, and to me personally." The Emperor raised a hand for silence. "Lieutenant Carter, do you understand what you have done? You have interfered in Imperial matters. You have threatened a carefully negotiated alliance." "With respect, Your Majesty," Alan replied, "I offered Princess Zilara a choice, something no one else has given her. She is royal," the Emperor said. "Her duty is to serve the Empire, not to choose. Even if that service means being hidden away, treated as something shameful." Alan felt anger rising in him. "Your daughter deserves better. You dare speak to me of what my daughter deserves?" The Emperor's light flared dangerously. Zilara moved her hover chair forward. "Father, please listen. Be silent," the Emperor commanded. "This is not about you." "But it is about me," Zilara said, her voice stronger than Alan had ever heard it. "My life. My future." The room fell silent. No one spoke back to the Emperor. "For years, I have done as expected," Zilara continued. "I stayed out of sight. I pursued my studies. I accepted that I would never have what my siblings have: respect, responsibility, love." Her light pulsed with each word. "But Alan sees me differently. He values my mind, not just my bloodline. He is human," the Emperor said, as if that explained everything. "Yes," Zilara agreed. "A species that celebrates differences rather than hiding them away. A culture that has learned that diversity creates strength." Captain Moore stepped forward. "Your Imperial Majesty, if I may speak." The Emperor nodded. While Lieutenant Carter acted without authorization, his actions might offer an unexpected opportunity. An alliance through mating with Earth would be stronger than one with the Crexian system, especially with the Muldari threat growing. The Crexian ambassador moved forward angrily. "We were promised this alliance. The arrangements are made. Compensations can be arranged," Captain Moore replied smoothly. "Earth has much to offer." The Emperor looked between the humans and the Crexians, calculating political advantages. "What of the biological aspects?" he finally asked. "Human and Valdurian biology is different." Dr. Winters spoke up. "Our medical team believes it's possible, Your Majesty. Different, yes, but potentially compatible in ways that could create a true mating bond." The Emperor turned his gaze to Alan. "And you, Lieutenant, you would willingly enter a permanent bond with my daughter, knowing what that means, knowing you could never return to Earth permanently." Alan met the Emperor's gaze steadily. "I would, Your Majesty, if she will have me." The room went silent as all eyes turned to Zilara. Her light began to grow brighter, shifting to a color Alan had never seen before, a deep, rich purple that seemed to pulse with possibility. "Princess Zilara," the Emperor said, "what is your answer?" The throne room remained silent as everyone waited for Zilara's answer. Her light continued to pulse with that deep purple glow. "I accept," she said finally, her voice clear and strong. "I choose to mate with Lieutenant Alan Carter of Earth." The Crexian delegates erupted in angry protest. Drax stepped forward, his light flashing with indignation. "This is unacceptable. We demand the agreement be honored." The Emperor raised his hand for silence. "Enough. The princess has spoken." He turned to Captain Moore. "Your offer of compensation for the Crexians must be substantial." "Earth is prepared to be generous," Captain Moore replied diplomatically. The Emperor studied his daughter and the human who stood beside her. His light shifted through several colors before settling into a steady gold. "I have ruled for 200 years. In that time, I have made many decisions for the good of our empire. Some of those decisions," he paused, looking directly at Zilara, "may have been mistaken." Zilara's light flashed with surprise. "The human speaks of valuing differences, of seeing strength where we have seen weakness." The Emperor's voice grew thoughtful. "Perhaps there is wisdom in this perspective." He stood from his throne, towering over everyone in the room. The mating between Princess Zilara of the Valdurian Empire and Lieutenant Alan Carter of Earth will proceed. It will symbolize the alliance between our worlds. All preparations will be redirected to this new arrangement. The palace burst into activity after the Emperor's pronouncement. The human delegation worked with Valdurian officials to combine their traditions for the ceremony. Medical teams from both species consulted on the biological aspects of the mating. The Crexians departed with promises of trade agreements and technology exchanges instead of a royal mate. 3 days before the ceremony, Alan found Zilara in the palace gardens. Her light was brighter than he had ever seen it. "Are you nervous?" he asked, sitting beside her hover chair. "Yes," she admitted, "but not about mating with you." Her light pulsed with warmth. "I worry about the changes this will bring. Already, people look at me differently, not with pity or disgust, but with curiosity." "Is that bad?" "It is strange," she said. "All my life, I have been the princess to avoid. Now I am at the center of attention." Ellen took her hand. "You've always deserved attention. Now they're finally seeing what I saw from the beginning." The mating ceremony took place in the great hall of the palace. Valdurians from across the empire attended, along with the entire human delegation. The hall glowed with the light of hundreds of Valdurians, creating a rainbow effect that took Alan's breath away. The ceremony combined Valdurian tradition with human customs. Alan and Zilara exchanged vows in both languages. They shared symbolic foods and drinks that represented unity. And finally, they participated in the biological bonding that was unique to Valdurian mating, a process that linked their physiologies in subtle but permanent ways. When it was complete, Alan felt a new awareness of Zilara, as if a part of his consciousness now extended to her. Their connection was deeper than he had imagined possible. At the celebration afterward, the Emperor approached them. He had never spoken directly to Alan outside of formal settings. "Lieutenant Carter, or should I say, Prince Consort," the Emperor said. "Alan is fine, Your Majesty," Alan replied with a bow. "Alan, then." The Emperor's light shifted to a softer gold. "You have changed many things with your simple question to my daughter. For the better, I hope," Alan said. "Time will tell. But already, I see younger Valdurians questioning old prejudices." He looked at Zilara. "And I see my daughter truly happy for the first time since her illness." Zilara's light pulsed in response, showing her emotion more clearly than words could. As the celebration continued around them, Alan and Zilara stood together near a window that overlooked the capital city. In the distance, ships from Earth and Valdurian vessels patrolled side by side, protecting their shared interests against the Muldari threat. "What happens now?" Alan asked. Zilara's light shimmered with joy. "Now we build something new. Together."